Welcome. I strongly recommend if you're coming on and you haven't had a moment to hear the invitation, to tell us your name and where you're beaming in from and what specifically is calling you. This is an opportunity to do it, and you can throw that in the chat box. The other thing is that I personally really enjoy when people are engaged in video, getting to see everybody. And so I oftentimes will look at everybody, but right now we will put you all on the back, and there we go. Okay, so the way that I like to begin class is with our eyes closed. And again, if you are doing something, I really invite you just to put it down for this one moment and give yourself this gift of coming fully present so that you can receive as much as possible in this next time together. And so we close our eyes and find your breath. And as you find your breath, really bring all of your energy, all of your focus down to your belly. This is where your other intelligence lives. A lot of us get really active in our brains, and that is where one of our intelligence lives. But we have another intelligence, and it lives in our gut. And as storytellers, we actually really use this other kind of intelligence, probably 80% of the time. We'll talk a little bit more about that in this class. So just bringing all of your energy down to this place. You might even want to place your hand on your belly and just become aware of what is there. Maybe there's tension, maybe there isn't. And just allowing your breath to find its way there. And as you're breathing, you might be noticing now your posture. Just bringing some awareness. Are you leaning forward, or are you leaning backward, or are you slunched down? And really inviting you to first, before you change it, just notice. Because that's also going to tell you how you're meeting the world through your story. Are you leaning forward? Are you using all your chi to push out into the room, blowing people back? Are you one of those people that leans back and lets everything come to you? Are you slunched down in such a way where you don't have connection to your core power, to your voice? So now that you've become aware of just that natural state in this moment, perhaps you want to tend to it a little bit. Maybe a little bit more breath to the bottom of your belly. Maybe engage those core muscles a little bit. And as you come to this place of neutrality, I'm going to invite you to remember back when you signed up for this class, what called you here? What called you here? Perhaps you're one of those people where the muse is knocking on your door and you are getting struck by inspiration nonstop. You just don't know what to do with it. Or you've been creating and now you're ready to take it to the next level. Or perhaps you can feel this banging around inside of you. There are stories inside that are ready and yearning and wanting to get out. And you're looking for just the right vehicle. Or perhaps you're one of the few among us that is a cantadora, that person who is really feeling called to carry those old stories forward so that they may continue to live among us. I invite you to consider all that, and also just to be alive with what is alive in your life right now that is requesting some tending. And perhaps in this next time together, this extra kind of listening for yourself and for what is coming through this class will speak to the many parts of you that need to be spoken to. I'm going to start us off with a quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen, and often, too often, stories saddle us, and they ride us, and they whip us onward, and they tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. I really like to begin this quote by Rebecca Solnit because it really speaks to the process of what I understand it is to become a sacred storyteller. We're going to talk a lot about that in this class. But it talks about first you got to be able to see them, then you got to be able to name them, and then you declare your relationship to them. And now you become part of this wild weaving creation process. I'm going to create another quote for you. Quick, that's great. I'm not creating this quote. I'm just reading this quote to you. The business of stories is not enchantment, and the business of stories is not escape. The business of stories is waking up. That's by Martin Shaw. And I also like to begin with that quote because it talks of the evolution of storytelling. I think at one point the storytellers, they went from village to village. They were the memory keepers. They were the news keepers. They helped people. They were the wisdom holders, and then they became the bards and the entertainers. And now we're in this place where, we're probably aware more than ever that our storytellers are also our creators of a future. And so they're really, it's a consciousness game if you want to play in that realm of storytelling. So if you've just joined, I always love hearing who's here and your name and what you're called for to learn about today. And you can always put that in the chat room. And I will ask questions. You guys are a very quiet group. I will ask questions. And if you feel called to answer them, just please know that your voice is truly desired and wanted in this space. It makes it fun. So here's what we're going to do. This is what we're going to accomplish together. I'm going to introduce you to the landscape of storytelling as a sacred art form. This is a very specific kind of way of approaching storytelling. And we're going to talk about what is a story, why is it relevant to times we're living in. We'll talk about 3 things that people often don't take into consideration when working with audiences. And then depending on how much engagement is, I'll also look at giving you guys a story recipe. Okay, so a little bit about me in terms of how I got here is that I grew up in a big farm in Vermont and spent a lot of time working with, playing with in the wilderness and in the out of doors. And I really believe that it was through that kind of relationship with the natural world. It started on a farm. I then eventually became a wilderness guide in Arizona and Utah and Montana and Alaska, and really developed a sense of what is it to listen? What is it to learn about the world that you live in through listening? Studied with real masters of the art, went to work off Broadway for a couple of years, worked in summer stock, soon discovered at a very young age that I did not want to have anything to do with the professional world of theater. But I had learned that there was something really magical that happens in that space, and I couldn't put my finger on it. But I could sense that when you come together in that way, there's an energy that is built, and I really got interested in catalyzing it. What would it be to work with that energy? And I went on to study experiential education and wilderness leadership and got a master's in social work, and all the while very committed to the environment. And as I started to weave in this work of, social justice, environmental justice, personal development, and really got committed to understanding that if you love the world, if you love this earth, you got to love people. And once people understand how to love themselves, then they might have a chance of really sharing that love with the planet that we're on. And so I really got interested in the whole personal development place. Long story short, I ended up working for Al Gore at his television network and produced and hosted the Green Channel, and got to be right in there at the nexus of when there were such things as green channels, and really how do we talk about climate change. And I got to look at all the data, and I got to see what people were looking at, what people were needing in their consumption of news and information. And what I learned was that people actually don't want that much news and information. They really hungered for story. And to me, that was one of the greatest gifts, because it gave me the kind of permission that I needed at that time to be absolutely true to who I was, which was that the genius that runs through me really runs through in the realm of story. And ended up working a lot in creating big stories that speak to the climate change in a mythic sense, and also stepped into the realm of working as a mystic storyteller, which I won't get into today, but that's a little bit about me. So, and I'm just seeing from Rowan, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Watching from Vancouver Island. I love that place. I was just on Cortez this summer, and I love to share myths and stories in my consulting practice, and that's why I'm here. Beautiful. I love integrated storytelling. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. I already told you. So let's begin. So the Hawaiians, and I am beaming into you from Maui today, hence my ocean hair. The Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or to move it into ocean. Excuse me. You know where my brain is. I'm sorry. I'm going to say that again. The words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or move it into motion. And if you ever have the chance to witness the hula, it is a powerful, powerful way that they use language in an activated, embodied prayer. And it's a profound thing to get to witness. A culture that has not lost relationship to their roots. The Sicilians believe that words poke holes in the universe. So think about the last time you got into an argument, you can't take back what was said. The Australians say that the stories from the past need to be sung to the present so that the future can exist. And the Maoris say that the words don't describe the things, that the words are the things. And all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I'm going to say that again because it's a really kind of profound thing to really grok. That all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. So as we wonder about humans' unique role on this planet, we have to wonder about our extraordinary capacity to do this amazing thing of seeing something in our imaginations that no one else can see, and then filtering it through our bodies, through this energy body of our heart and our soul and our all the different things of how we feel, and we speak it into the world. And that what we speak then can become, it matters, right? It matters that we actually have consequence in the world. What we say matters, but also it can become true matter, like things. I always think about Charles Lindbergh. You know, he just had a dream about a plane, and then he made it because he spoke about it. Okay, then abracadabra. It's one of the oldest words on the planet. There's great debate about where it actually comes from. Today we'll say it's from the ancient Aramaic mysticism. And what does it mean? But I create as I speak. So that's where we begin. So I want to start with, what is a story? What is a story? And I invite you to, you can speak out loud, you can, put it in the chat. But this is a moment for us just to, there's no right or wrong answer. We're all human, so we are made of stories. So is there anyone among us that feels compelled to speak to what is a story? Okay, so you guys are catching me off guard, I have to say. Normally we have about 5 times as many people, and we have a lot of people that are chatting, but it's okay. This is where we are today, and we'll make sense of all this. So a story, in the most pedestrian way of an unromantic ways of speaking about a story, is that back in humans have always spoken about themselves in reference to the latest technology. So we used to refer to our bodies as machines. So if we keep looking at that, we consider a story as an operating system, as we speak in the technology era of our time. And that operating system is that place where we learn about our values, our belief systems, and what we believe is possible. And at some point when we grow up, in many different places, we consciously or unconsciously agree to share stories. So we do that in our families. We do that with ourselves. We talk stories about ourselves to others. We tell stories about the world that we live in. And I would say probably one of the reasons why, we are living in such complex times is because we don't have a lot of shared stories anymore. We have to really consider what is that doing to a society when we don't have a lot of shared stories about where we're from, how we got here, what we're doing here, what our purpose is, what our value is. So I invite you in this moment just to consider, can you start becoming a story spotter? The stories that you grew up with, the stories in your workplace, stories in your family, stories in your town. And just start noticing them. When you notice them, you can start to choose what role you play in them. Now we're going to take it one step further. We're going to say, okay, well, what is a sacred story? Again, normally I would toss this out to you, but I'm going to align with our deep listeners today. And what is a sacred story? To me, this is a story that has a life inside of it. There's a setup when you call anything sacred, because inherently, when you call something sacred, you inherently say that something else is not sacred. So it's a setup. But in our time, when there has been such a massive loss of connection to the natural world, of seeing the life in all things, Indigenous perspective has what's called a vision of animism, where we see, the life in my teacup, the life in this computer, the life in this home, this house. And when you start seeing the life in all things, then all things have that sense of the divine in them. They're sacred. There's a relationship of value and respect that goes into that relationship. So we use that language to come back to that way of thinking and to remind us of something that has been lost over time. And so now when we use that in reference to a sacred story, we're saying, oh, okay, so there's life in this story. So there's a spark of the divine. And you're like, well, what's the divine? Well, I think there's a lot of different words that we can use for it. As I most often just call it the muse, a creative life force. Some people will call it the ancestors, or the gods, or their guides, or even the earth speaking out loud. But it's got a life force that's in it. And to me, if it's a sacred story, now we're talking about a story that is here in service to life, thriving. So sacred stories will have wisdom inside of them. They might have some medicine inside of them. What I love about sacred stories is that they'll give you access to something that's already inside of you. There's an element of sovereignty that I believe lives in sacred stories. So, if you're like Browen's saying, she uses them in her consulting business, there's a classic stereotype of, a young person goes to Indigenous elder and says, give me advice. And the elder gives them a story, and what's the beauty in that is that it's the antithesis of our current self-help world that we live in, because we're like, help, I need some help. So someone else go tell me my answer, and what I love about storytelling is that it helps the person find the answer within, because you can tell the same story 15, 20 times. And even as a teller and as a listener, you might receive something completely different. A whole new piece of wisdom can emerge out of it, so that according to what's there in the moment, and where you are living in your life. So that to me, it's a living story that that is affected by the listeners. And I've told certain stories over and over and over again, and each time they will emerge slightly different based on who's in the room and what those people and what those souls are calling out in their lives. So if you're like, well, that sounds nice, but what's the opposite of a sacred story? And that's what I would call a zombie story. So a zombie story is a story that does not live with a consciousness that's here to serve life thriving. And so what that might look like, an example that I can use is the story of Jaws. So Jaws was written by Peter Benchley, and it was picked up by Steven Spielberg. It was the very first film that he ever created. And when you come to a story and you really want to get to know it, one of the first things that you can do is you can go back and say, well, who created the story? What were the times that it was created in? And what were they in service to? You know, what was the creator in service to? And what was the story in service to? So what do we know about Steven Spielberg about that time in his life? Is he really wanted to be a famous director, you know, and he had an eye for a story that would grab a lot of attention. You know, we can go into the whole science of that, but we're not going to go down that path right now. And when we look at that story, there were a couple of really interesting things that were going on. One is in the times that story was told, there's not a lot of violence in movies. You know, nothing like what we see now. So people were not prepared to see violence. They weren't numb in the same way that we are. I'm sorry, I just made a gross generalization. I'll rewind. Many people are pretty numb to the violence that they see in movies, not all of us. So when we look at that, then we also say, okay, something else was pretty amazing about this particular film is that they filmed it out in the ocean. And it was the very first film to ever be filmed out in the ocean. Now, whether or not you consciously speak in the language of symbols, as Jung tells us, where there's a collective unconscious, and we actually all speak in the language of symbol, with or without our conscious intention, and the ocean represents our consciousness. And so what happens when they take this film and they go and they film it out in the open ocean, and they're mechanical shark breaks, and they're smart filmmakers, so they just start to show images of it, so it instantly becomes symbolic. And it becomes symbolic of our fear of the unknown and our fear of death, right there in the center of our consciousness. That film is single-handedly responsible for a mass agreement of fear of sharks, but also a mass kill-off of sharks. When Peter Benchley discovered the impact of his film and what it had done, he spent the rest of his life trying to be an ocean steward and really trying to bring awareness to the damage of that kind of storytelling. So I say that as a cautionary tale because I don't believe that either of those people intended to do any harm through telling that story. And so I really invite you, as you step further and further into storytelling, to start becoming aware of where are the zombie stories that are living in your life. You know, to me, the quickest test is, you watch a TV show, do you feel good and enlivened and like you love humans and the world is not a bad place to be in, or do you feel like it's all for nothing and this is horrific and there's all there is horror and depression in the world, and if that's how you feel at the end of watching a film or a story or a TV show, then I really invite you to really take a step back and consider who you are, the power that you have as a listener. So I'm going to go into the realm of a Venn diagram now. And again, if at any moment you've got questions, I know I've shared this a million times now. You know how I love your participation. Okay, so I'm going to show you this fancy little Venn diagram. Okay, so here we have. I'm going to talk a little bit about what does storytelling do. So one of the biggest things that storytelling does is it creates a kind of connection. And that connection is around, it happens in a couple different ways. So I'm going to tell you a short little story. Once upon a time, not so long ago, in the center of the ocean, way at the very, very bottom of the ocean, there was this elephant. And this elephant had the most magnificent pink saddle on its back. And the tiniest little fairy with long blonde hair sitting on that pink saddle. And the elephant would walk step by step, step by step. And every step that it took through the bottom of the ocean, another tree started to grow. Okay, so that's a little short example of a story. So perhaps some of you saw that image in your mind. And if you saw that image in your mind, you realize that we time traveled, we reality bended, we did all these kind of crazy things and we went there together. And it was sort of like magic, right? We were using all of this virtual reality technology to, get to bend reality, but really we just did this radical bending of reality, and we could have done it without any technology, yet we did get to do it together because of technology. And what I'm calling magic, Princeton calls neural coupling. Because what happens is the frontal lobe of my brain starts to engage and light up when I start creating that image. And the exact same place in your brain also starts to light up as you start to create that image. And so we, in that time, co-created a reality together. So it was pretty innocent, right? It was very innocent. We just were hanging out with elephants and fairies and making a forest at the bottom of the ocean. But Hitler did the same thing, and he co-created a reality together. And so again, I always say, the illusion in storytelling is that the power is in the teller. That there is a lot of power in the telling because you create that space for the listening. And so, but as listener, don't ever underestimate the power that you have, because you're the one that allows the seed of that story to grow inside of you, or not. So the other thing, the other reason I like to speak about the connection that happens is there's a thing that some of you might have experienced at the very beginning, is that I prepared you for listening. So if you took me up on the offer, you had a moment to stop doing everything else, and you had a moment to become aware of yourself, and I gave you a task. The task that I invited you into was to not only listen to me, right? That's kind of boring after a while. I invited you to listen to yourself. I invited you to listen for yourself, that something in today would not only inform you about storytelling, but about something in your life. And so the reason why I mention this is that this is one of the ways that you can prepare your audience to catch what you have to give. And we'll talk about what that is. The other thing that lives in storytelling is eldership. I really do believe this, and eldership does not get involved with, just being older. Many younger people that are on the path to eldership. And it's about living with a sense of responsibility, of being considerate and aware of the people that are coming behind you, as well as the people that are in front of you. And it's understanding the value of what you have to offer this world, and that it goes beyond just that moment that you're stepping on the earth today. And so with stories, you never know how far your stories are going to go. You never know how many people that are going to carry them. And so there's this sense of belonging that I really believe comes into process when we tell our stories, because it's like we're taking our place, not just in the world that we live in today, but also in the future. It's kind of a weird, unexplainable magic that happens there. The other thing that I really believe that happens in the sense of belonging is that when people are really courageous and they speak the truth of who they are, and they speak the truth of their story, what did we see out of the transgender movement when more and more people spoke the truth of what they were, and that gave more space for other people to say yes to the truth of what they were. Same thing with the Me Too movement, same thing with the Civil Rights movement. When more people speak to the truth that lives within inside of them, then it starts to ripple out. So there's a resonance factor that happens. That's a much longer class that we can speak to, but I'll just speak to that. Healing lives in stories. And I really do believe strongly about this, and that stories can be healing as they're told to the self. And we can tell stories that are healing as medicine. And that I do a whole work on the arc of working with stories as healing. And there's a process that I just want to honor. Sometimes we need to just tell a story, and it's for our own healing. And we tell it, the process of creating it is the medicine. And then sometimes we take a story and we're like, you know what, I went through this total trauma, or this total heartbreak, or this total thing, and it was really, it just sucked. But I learned a thing or two, and I want to make sure that someone else, when they come to that pothole on the road, that I can give them a bridge across it. So maybe they don't have to go through the exact same, challenges that I did. And now, so you take that challenge and you move the story into this place where it's not just about your trauma, it's not just about your pain, but it becomes about this thing where it transforms, and you transform the telling of it, and it becomes a gift. And that can be a wisdom story. So I love these kinds of stories, and I'll give you a little way to tell them later. Bridges, bridges to the past, bridges to the future, and then love. I think that, I've never ever sat in a room and heard people tell their stories and not fallen in love with people. I don't know that it's possible, honestly. So that is, that's what I understand in terms of really kind of getting into and understanding storytelling. What I would tell you now is, you guys just took me by surprise because you're so quiet. Normally we have these very engaged conversations. As you can tell, I've got a bit of a hang up on this right now. So what I do is, if you have any questions, then please feel free to ask them. And if not, what I will do is I will give you a story recipe, and it's one way for, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to tell you a story. That's what I'll do. I'll tell you a very short story. And then for anyone who wants to learn more about how to continue to work with story, I'll stay on for a couple more minutes, and I will also, talk to you about a couple classes and a couple ways that you can continue doing this work. So that's what's going to happen. I'll tell you a short story. I'm going to read you a quote. For those who feel done, mighty, have a great day. And for those who want to stay and learn a little bit more about how to work with story, you'll be free to stay. So this story is one of the very few stories that I carry. We're all different kinds of storytellers. I often ask people, and I invited you to think about that at the beginning. Are you someone who has to tell your own stories? Does the muse come popping in? Do you make sense of the world through stories that you tell? Or are you carrying the old stories? Do you carry other people's stories? And I only carry one story. And this is a story that was told to me at a women's gathering many years ago. It was called Buckeye Gathering. It was held by this beautiful, wild, spicy woman by the name of Dot. And unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the woman who gave me the story. And I've tried to find her. So the first thing that I'm doing, is I'm just going to tell you what I'm doing as I'm doing it, is I like telling people, where does the story come from? Honor the roots of where your story comes from. Honor the person that it was, how it arrived on your doorstep. So the thing that this woman did was she'd done something that I'd never heard before. She said, I'm going to give you a story. Never heard that. It's like as if it could be mine to have forever. So I'm going to give you this story. And the story begins in perhaps not the easiest of scenes to jump into. The story begins in a cell in Auschwitz during the Holocaust. And the woman who is in the story was the grandmother of the woman who told me the story. And she was in this cell with 6 other women that are very, very hungry. And she realized that the hunger was more than they could handle. And so she made a deal with one of the guards. And she asked for some food. And she pulled out the wedding ring that had been sewn into her jacket in exchange for this food. And the guard took her ring and said he would do the best that he could. And when he came back with 5 eggs. And yet there were 6 women. This woman sat there with this incredibly hard decision. How is she going to feed 6 women with 5 eggs? Who was she going to leave out when there was this much hunger in the room? And then it occurred to her that there was a hunger that was much deeper than what was in their stomachs. So she took those eggs and she separated out the yolks. She separated out the others. And on that afternoon, those women had facials. I just love that story. It's so simple. And it's so short. And I invite you just to carry whatever it is in you that it has to give you in this moment. You know, for me, that story is much bigger than that moment or that time. It's about how do you look at the heart of the situation, past the illusion, into what really, really matters, and how do you also not get caught in small-minded thinking. So I'm going to leave you with this quote, which is, act as if you are people of consequence, that I can treat you as such, and that you matter. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world is to have no consequence in this world? It's a velvet gauntlet, this idea of being of consequence. It doesn't clink when it hits the ground, but you can feel it. It would be proper to perceive that there is consequence to us being here. And that quote is by Stephen Jenkinson. So if what you wanted was the webinar and introduction to sacred storytelling, that was that. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about if you feel called to continue to play in the world of story, and a couple of other options that are available to you right now. And what I'll do is I'll put this link in here, right here, in case you want to play along. And I'll also just kind of go through this page right now. So I have several different programs that are running right now, and one of them is Speak the Spark. This is an online program where we bring in a lot of guest speakers and really get to go on a 7-month journey together. That program is actually closed right now, but there's another program that is open, and this is a kind of a unique program, and it's unique in the sense that the doors don't close. You can jump in at any time, but our next class begins on Saturday, this coming Saturday, and this is, to me, some of the most exciting work of how to work with story in our time. And it's working with story as a form of initiation. I'm just going to share this page with you because I can. And I think this is working. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is Stories Initiation. And basically, you know, what I understand about stories is, you know, pick your initiations or they're going to choose you. And there was a time in our life when you know, people did live much closer to the land, and they had to work with the natural world in their initiations. You know, people went out on solos, there was hunting, there was all different kinds of things. And what happens in the form of initiation is that your gifts are revealed, your limitations are revealed. There's an element of doing this work in community, so that you're actually not doing it on your own. You're seen in both your challenges and your triumphs, and those are reflected back to you. They're resonated back to you so that you can carry them stronger out into the world. And your place in your community is recognized and established. We don't have a lot of this in the same way. You know, the key initiations that are now, you know, birth is an initiation, weddings are initiation, you know, death is an initiation. But, you know, some would say that your entire life is preparing you as one big initiation for your death. And so we are being initiated all the time. And it comes in our workplace, it comes in our family place, it comes through health crises, it comes in many, many different ways. And without the context of initiation, we don't always have a way to understand and make sense of the suffering or the challenges, and we don't have a way to meet them and allow them to really help strengthen us. And the reason why I see this as being in story is because each situation that we have in our lives, it's carried in us through the way that we carry the story. And so maybe you didn't get to have the proper initiation, but you can go back to these key moments in your life and work with them through story so that you can glean that part and carry your story in another way. So this part you've already seen. Dun, 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 dun. Our very first one was the story of birth. It was really fun. We did it last month. And in that, you know, I'm not going to go too much into it, but it was a really exciting experience. And the women that came, we go on a big journey. It's a 9-hour class. I think it's 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time. And in that time, you get to do a lot of solo work, and you get to do a lot of creation time, and you get to work one-on-one with people in small groups and as a whole. And you also get to actually go out in your version. Well, I'm not going to give away the secrets of the class, but you won't be sitting in front of the computer this whole time, and you're never going to hear me talk probably this much ever again, because a lot of it is a very interactive class. Our next class is a story of love, and to me, this is just really, really exciting stuff. What happens when you start looking at what is your love story, and how is your love story being impacted by, Hollywood and Hallmark, or your family's belief systems, or the town belief systems that you're in, or, and how can you start to pull apart and come into the truth of who you are as a lover of yourself, of other, of the planet. And so this is going to be a big journey that we're going to go on. And you're going to have an opportunity also to come out with a mythic version of your own love story. So we both work in the personal narrative, and we also work in the mythos, the mythic narrative. And to me, this is a very powerful way to work, because when you start working in the mythic realm, you're working in the land of symbol and metaphor. And there's a freedom that comes in that, and there's you can kind of pop into experiencing yourself as living in a much bigger story, because it becomes your story, it supersedes and exits just being about this one time that you're living in, and can be about more like your soul's journey and your relationship in your cosmos, your cosmic journey. So this is, to me, I've seen people go through some of the most extraordinary, delightful, easeful changes when working with story in this way. And it's also, to me, a form of liberation. So if you're stuck in a love story that is not working for you, I really invite you to play with this. This was from Audrey, who was in our last class. So this is a whole series. And so you can either take one or the whole series. I would say that the series is powerful. Each initiation builds on the other, and it's designed to go through initiations as we go through life. So as you look through what is an infant's expression coming into life, they go through birth, they experience love from the parents, and one of the very first tasks that you are given as a young one is to learn how to receive, and that whole receiving process. They actually say that Americans have the hardest time than any other culture receiving. And I might guess that it has something to do with that our consumeristic culture has a lot to do with taking. So we're going to go back, and the next story is really about, where are you out of alignment? What is your story of receiving, and how does that deal with your story of value, the story of guilt, your story of worthiness? We're going to go into, what is it then to be giving your gifts? Again, on the flip side of, once you receive, what are you giving? And we're going to be going into that. And then, what is in the way of you giving your gifts? The story of doubt, the story of the critic, the story of fear. I love this quote by Gil, and I'm just gonna read it just because it cracks me up. Gil came in, he's very established public speaker, and he said, "I've noticed that my voice is changing out in the world." This is from taking a class. "My pace is different, my register is different, my willingness to go places I've never gone before and take more chances and be more unknown in what I'm doing is different." He also went on to say, which I just loved, he's like, "I had no idea what I was coming for, and I can't even fully express what I received, but now I actually can feel the stories that are coming through." And I thought that was a really profound, potent thing to say. So I'm not going to go through all of this, because if you feel inclined, but you can start to see that this is kind of where it's going. And we do one class per month. We then also do an integration call. So we get to meet a couple weeks after our big long day, just to see, how are you shifting and changing? And here's what I understand about storytelling, is that when you're working with living stories, they're kind of just like a tree. We never expect our trees to stay the same. We hope that they will grow and grow and grow, and that they will change, right? When when a tree is young, it puts down its roots and it receives all the resources, and it starts to grow, and then eventually it puts out limbs and leaves and creates shade and fruits and feeds and the whole thing. And I think of our stories as the same thing, and ourselves as storytellers in the same way. And so if there's nothing else I can leave you with on this day, is that may your stories always have the freedom to change. And may your role within the story also have the freedom to shift and transform and change. So that is our class for today. I thank you all for coming and for your quiet listening. And if you have any questions, I will stay on for a few more moments and we'll happily answer them. And otherwise, I wish you all the best. And you can, other ways that you can engage in storytelling. Welcome, Noel. Other ways that you can engage in storytelling, if you are interested, is if I also do what I call storytelling priestessing. So if you are further along in working with your story work or really want help emerging your creative life force, I work one-on-one with people and doing that. And then I also do a form of mystic storytelling. And that mystic storytelling is it's where I read people's fields and I see what I see how they're living their lives playing out in the mythic dimension. It's kind of wild and unexplored. It's just different, and it's a really wonderful way to get to know yourself. Adaga, I hope I say your name is right. Stories are the thread us together. They connect us, and this was such a good example of it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, have a lovely day, and take good care.